Good afternoon and good evening. Bonjour, bonsoir. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to this roundtable discussion, an international response to human rights in the Philippines, focused on Geneva, but with a worldwide participation. My name is Peter Murphy, speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal people in Sydney, Australia, in my role as chairperson of the Global Council of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Today's roundtable is organised by ICHRP Global and co-sponsored by EBON International, the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, United Church of Canada, National Union of People's Lawyers, Karapatan, International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and Education International. Yesterday, we heard the oral report of High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Michelle Bachelet, on the implementation of the resolution of the UN Human Rights Council of October last year, which authorized a technical assistance and capacity building program on human rights for the Philippines. In her speech, the High Commissioner underlined continuing serious human rights violations since October last year. She also said the ICC decision to investigate crimes in the Philippines brings into sharp focus the issue of the ability and willingness of domestic accountability mechanisms to produce clear and measurable results. The Philippine delegate replied, claiming that domestic justice mechanisms were working well. He rejected entirely the High Commissioner's complaints about red tagging and brazenly called on the UN to support President Duterte's counter-insurgency campaign. In the statements by civil society in the following interactive debate, 12 out of 27 spoke out against the Duterte government's violations of human rights. So our campaign has significant achievements in the stand of the special rapporteurs and of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in the ICC outcome, and in the growing alarm in the international community at the record of the Duterte government. But we are also faced with the Duterte government able to continue and even escalate its violations. So we have a lot more to achieve. To help us advance the discussion about how we can go forward in solidarity with the Filipino people who are struggling to assert their basic human rights, ICHRP and the co-sponsors have convened this roundtable discussion. We have invited speakers from a range of sectors to stimulate this discussion with opening remarks of 2 to 3 minutes. And they are Karen Curtis, Freedom of Association Chief at the International Labour Organization, Attorney Jan Fermon, the Secretary General of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, Janet Rice, Senator and the Australian Greens Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Jeroen Beirnaert, Director of Human and Trade Union Rights at the International Trade Union Confederation, Séverine de Lavallee, a Deputy for the Ecolo-Groen group in the Belgian Parliament, Bishop Rex Reyes on the World Council of Churches Executive Committee and the member from the Episcopal Church of the Philippines, and Lady Anne Salem from the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. So following their opening remarks, we will have a 30-minute period for 2-minute contributions from any participant. And when we have done that, we will try to wrap up the ideas we have developed in a 15-minute period and then end the round table. So to get my attention, raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Stay muted until I give you the call, and then let's see what sort of discussion we can have. So the first person I'd like to introduce properly is Karen Curtis from the International Labour Organization. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting the ILO to participate in this important roundtable. The Philippines has been a long-standing member of the ILO and ratified the 2 fundamental conventions on freedom of association shortly after their adoption. The ILO independent and tripartite supervisory bodies have devoted particular attention to the numerous allegations of murders of trade unionists and anti-union violence. They've called for their full investigation and the conclusion of any pending judicial proceedings without delay, so as to establish the facts, determine culpability, and punish the perpetrators, with the aim of effectively preventing and combating impunity. In 2011 and 12, the government took important steps to set up monitoring mechanisms to address these grave violations and establish guidelines for the police and armed forces with the objective of fostering an enabling environment for the enjoyment of constitutionally guaranteed civil liberties and trade union rights throughout the territory, including with respect to the economic zones. These guidelines established a strong foundation for the exercise of workers' freedom of association, forbade the deployment of military personnel in relation to labor-related mass actions, and prohibited the police and the army from conducting anti-insurgency campaigns, including red tagging, in respect of the exercise of trade union rights and civil divisions. Regrettably, we have seen an increase of complaints of violation of workers' basic civil liberties, creating a climate in which trade union rights are seriously hindered. It's of critical importance, therefore, that the investigative mechanisms convene regularly, function efficiently, and have sufficient resources and staff so as to contribute to effective and timely monitoring and investigation of allegations of extrajudicial killings and other forms of violence against trade union leaders and members. Recently, the ILO had the opportunity to hear the views of its tripartite constituents of the situation on the ground, challenges faced and steps taken, but it's essential that the high-level tripartite mission called for by the ILO Committee in 2019 be able to visit the country as soon as the sanitary conditions permit. This mission has a critical role to play in shedding light on the nature and degree of the challenges and assisting in taking steps for the protection of human life and personal safety necessary for the full exercise of freedom of association. The work of the United Nations has provided critical support in the ILO's understanding of the overall climate in the country and its impact on the exercise of trade union rights specific to our mandate. We trust that under the umbrella of UN, we will continue to work in synergy, more specifically to assure full respect for civil liberties, without which trade union rights lose our meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'd now like to ask Attorney Jan Fermon to come to open up his mic and speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to say that we could probably not agree more with what the chairperson of the Human Rights Council said yesterday. That is that it's obvious that human rights, that enforcement mechanisms in the Philippines and the remedies in the Philippines actually do hardly exist for victims of human rights violations. And so I think it's important, first of all, that this independent international commission of investigation was organized, because when domestic remedies do not work, and when cases have to be taken to international fora and to the international also public opinion, it's very clear that more than ever non-governmental organizations, non-governmental initiatives play a crucial role. And I think in collecting the evidence, in collecting materials, in exposing human rights violations in the Philippines, of course, our friends in the Philippines, including our friends from the National Union of People's Lawyers, who is an affiliate to the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, have played a very, very important role. But to take it to a next level, to internationalize it, I think the work of initiatives like the International Commission of Investigation are absolutely essential. International fora, I think the recommendations made by the International Commission of Investigation very rightly make recommendations to a whole series of international organizations. Very often when human rights violations are mentioned, the question then is narrowed down to violations of civil and political rights, and secondly, excluding violations of economic, social, and cultural rights. And secondly, very often the only remedy people have in mind, or the only forum people have in mind, is the International Criminal Court. And although that is, of course, an important forum, especially when crimes against humanity are committed, as in this case, I think it's obviously not the only forum. And that's why I'm very happy that the Independent International Commission, in its recommendations, also proposes actions to be taken towards the Human Rights Council, towards the specialized committees, towards the ILO, which all of them are very important international mechanisms to be used to expose and to investigate human rights violations. Then, more specifically regarding the International Criminal Court, because I was asked to say a word about that, I think the decision taken by the pre-trial chambers on the 15th of September to allow the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to make an investigation into especially the war on drugs is a very important decision. Because it triggers a process in a leading international forum on human rights violations. And I think actually the war on drugs, as far as I can see, is to some extent also a kind of example or a kind of test for many other mechanisms of the same kind, which are used by the Duterte government, such as, for example, the so-called war on terror, which has a lot of similarities with a mechanism that is now at least being considered by the pre-trial chambers as a mechanism to be investigated as a possible crime against humanity. So I think we have to fully use that situation to bring to the attention of the international community the situation in the Philippines. But we should not be, and I'll conclude on that, we should not be naive either. The role of the grassroots organizations, the role of the organizations in the Philippines and the international organizations supporting these grassroots organizations will continue to be crucial. We know from the experience with the International Criminal Court that if you want really a case to, and we know it especially from our friends in Palestine, if you want really a case to progress in the International Criminal Court, then the role of the grassroots organizations reporting, collecting the facts, bringing the facts and the evidence to the International Criminal Court is absolutely essential. So I would say the role of the International Commission now has been crucial, and I think we now have to look at the next stage. How can we continue to work with our friends in the Philippines to fuel all these international mechanisms, to provide them with the evidence, to provide them with the materials from day to day on human rights violations in the Philippines? And I hope we will be able to work together on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Jan. Can I now introduce Senator Janet Rice, the Foreign Affairs spokesperson of the Australian Greens.
Thanks, Peter. And yes, hello everyone. So I'm coming to you from Melbourne in Australia, and I'm on First Nations Wurundjeri country, which is stolen land. And I want to first acknowledge that here in Australia, that all of our lands here, that sovereignty of these lands was never ceded by our First Nations peoples, and that we are on land that always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I'm a senator in the Australian Parliament. I'm the Australian Greens Foreign Affairs spokesperson. So I've got a lot of awareness in that role of human rights abuses that are going on all around the world. One of the things about being a foreign affairs spokesperson is that you know that there's a lot of pretty horrible stuff that's happening around the world. And my awareness and my eyes have been really opened over the last year through being involved in the Investigate PH project, where I was invited to be one of the high commissioners sort of overseeing the project. And I knew that there was some pretty awful stuff going on in the Philippines, but the evidence that was collated from the Investigate PH project, I found to be just overwhelming and incredibly sobering. The brazen, the brutal attacks on Filipino people by the Duterte government is shocking. And the power of the Investigate PH project was that it actually talked to people on the ground, heard the voices of people on the ground as to what was really going on, whether they were Indigenous people, peasants, the urban poor, students, trade unionists, human rights defenders, lawyers, peace advocates. And we heard case after case of the attacks, the murders, the red tagging, the essentially attacks on people just because they were people that the Duterte government found inconvenient to be alive. And particularly, you know, whether they were people that were critics of the government or just, you know, having been the crime of being poor and the crime of just not having power in that society, in our society. The work of the Investigate PH project and how these appalling human rights violations have continued, and in fact, they've, to some extent, they seem to have even got worse since the UN report in June 2020. The work of this project was really very much corroborated by Michelle Bachelet at the UN yesterday, who basically said, yes, this is what is going on, and also noting that the International Criminal Court have decided to begin an investigation. So it is not, I think it's, we need to really acknowledge that Michelle Bachelet saying that yesterday was significant. And so the issue is, well, then we know this is going on. It is appalling. What can the global community do about it? The Investigate PH third report, which was released last month, had a list of, I think it was 18 different recommendations of saying, here is the evidence of what's going on. Here is what some recommendations for agencies, from the international agencies right through to civil society and to individual countries, of the action that we can take and that we must take. And for me in Australia, I find it very powerful to think that around the world, as other countries, if we can activate our civil society, activate our political systems, we can be effective in applying pressure to the Philippines government, to the Duterte government, and actually get change. And that's what sort of keeps me going, because knowing the power of communities working together globally, as has occurred through this international Investigate PH project, can be really powerful. I mean, I really encourage you to read the three reports of the project, or at least read the summaries of them, which are all online and all very readily available. And I just wanted to go through a couple of the recommendations of the final report, and basically, particularly for the UN, and particularly significant given Michelle Bachelet's comments yesterday, is that we need to have more than the technical support that has been going on over the last year and a half, that we need a UN independent investigation of human rights violations. We need to have these reports brought to the attention of all of the UN bodies and of civil society across the world. And the other particular things that I really wanted to focus on, again, there are a lot of recommendations to different agencies around the world, but to individual states, so no matter where you are in the world, actually applying pressure on our governments to be supporting the resumption of peace negotiations, to be suspending all military and police aid, and basically saying, no, we are not going to cooperate with you, the Filipino government, unless you actually lift your game and stop these appalling, brutal practices. So it's suspending military and police aid until we do. Particularly the US need to pass the Philippines Human Rights Act to halt the US government's Philippine military funding and assistance. The European Commission need to use all of the available instruments that they've got to be applying pressure to the government. And then, of course, we're in a situation where we know there is an election coming up, and the global society needs to be working with the Philippines to make sure that there is safety of all election officials, volunteers, voters, and the general public, and to maintain the integrity of the election in May next year. So these are some really practical things that international society and international civil society and international governments can be doing and must be doing, because we cannot allow these appalling, brutal attacks on people in the Philippines to continue. Because the thing about human rights is that they should be universal. No matter who we are, no matter what country we live in, we should have the rights to be able to live our lives peacefully and well, and live fulfilling and meaningful lives, and not be living under fear of death, of persecution, because of taking action to be supporting those rights, or just because you're an inconvenient person that the government decides that they don't need to pay any attention to. And so because human rights should be universal, it's up to all of us, all around the world, to be taking action, to be supporting the human rights in the Philippines just as much as in all of the other parts of the world where we know human rights are under attack. And I think we really need to keep the focus on the Philippines, because it's very easy, as we saw the government, the Philippines responded yesterday, to try and brush all this away and say it's not going on. We need to be speaking truth to that powerful government, and we need to be getting the information out about what is really going on and taking real powerful action to be trying to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Rice. Can I now ask Jeroen Beirnaert, the Director of Human and Trade Union Rights at the International Trade Union Confederation, to take us, Mike.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks to all the speakers that spoke before me. We'll continue along the same lines. So I'm speaking for the International Trade Union Confederation. That's a global umbrella of national trade union centers. But we do work closely with international umbrellas for sectoral unions. For example, the Education International, which is a co-host of this event that groups the teachers, Building and Woodworkers International for construction workers, Industrial for workers in industry, or IOF for agricultural workers. And just to say that we have a very strong coordination. It doesn't happen very often that across all sectors in the global trade union movement, there's such unanimity in terms of a position when it comes to the freedom of association in the Philippines. So if you transpose that to the national level, we have our own affiliates, the national trade union centers such as KMU, I see Elmer on the call, TUCP, FFW, and Centro, but we work closely at the national level with groups like ACT for the teachers, the ACT Alliance, and NACAISA, which is a broader labor platform. But in all, you can see that it represents one of the three social partners that are included in Karen's constituency of the ILO. And it is the group of people that are actually hardest affected by the violence and the violations of freedom of association in the country. So what you'll hear from me is slightly less balanced than what you heard from Karen when she represents the three social partners and the findings of the office. Because we've noticed that our concerns are not necessarily shared by the government, which is obvious from what others have contributed, but also not employers and businesses, who it seems to be that there is some convenience in having an atmosphere that is hostile to unions and collective bargaining in the Philippines, that allows them to do business more easily and without much interference from workers' participation. So we've been pushing with the ILO as our privileged advocacy target in the global institutions for change, very much in line with what others have presented. Unionists are being attacked in the Philippines, red tagged. There's extrajudicial killings that go with impunity, that are clearly trade union leaders that are attacked for their activism rather than having something to do with the war on drugs or on terror. Similar to what others have said, despite around 2 decades now of increased pressure, the things have not improved. And on the contrary, we have evidence of continued new killings, new persecutions, new allegations and harassment of teachers to disaffiliate from unions, to change curricula, journalists being put under pressure. So all these situations continue. And we were slightly disappointed with the outcome of the Human Rights Council's the discussion last year, that it ended up in a technical assistance exercise, because we have some experience with technical assistance in the Philippines through the ILO and supported with the ILO, where that doesn't affect the commitment of the office or the people involved in offering the technical assistance, but there's clearly a lack of political will in the country to actually change things in reality. So I fully agree with Janet and Jan and all the people that have said we need to really push political pressure on the country to drive real change. That has to happen. I think it's very helpful that I just learned that Maria Teresa from Rappler has received the Nobel Peace Prize for her activism. I think that helps to put things in the spotlight, the Philippines in the spotlight, and we need to build on that, both with documentation, as Jan mentioned it, really through thorough documentation of the continued violations and evidence building. We've been consistently confronted with a response from the government that says that the cases of violence that we identify are random and not linked to any activism, not any trade union activities. And I'm sure that's similar for other groups in civil society. So we really need to document that evidence, which we will do in our privileged advocacy space, which is the ILO at the international level. And we need to make sure that those international advocacy fora, as Jan also mentioned it, communicate with each other, that the information that we send to the ILO was also picked up by the Human Rights Council and in the International Court, that it clearly shows that that violations of rights occur on all these different elements, and that it's not an isolated issue of either labor or other human rights that are monitored in the Human Rights Council. So that is, I think, important. We'll play out our part in making sure that we can infiltrate or break the convenient excuse that COVID-19 is offering to governments that do not want to engage with international monitoring mechanisms and allowing missions in the country, so that we can continue for the case to be investigated by the ILO and with hopefully with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights as well. And then I think one last element to wrap it up, the involvement of civil society, unions for us specifically, is crucial to make the exercise credible. It's both at the international level, but also at the national level. We've heard a lot of developments from the government that says, well, we've put up institutions and mechanisms to monitor all these violations and to address them. But as long as there's no involvement of the people that are actually affected, in our case, the trade unionists, it's one, not a credible exercise, and it cannot hold the government to an account. And it's not connected to the reality that is experienced by our people on the ground. So I think those are crucial elements for us to, both at the international level and national level, to push for, to drive change in the year to come. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. I would now ask Séverine de Lavallee to open up your microphone. Please go ahead, Séverine.
Hi, everyone. I hope you hear me correctly.
You're coming through clearly. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. thank you all for the opportunity you gave me today to share my concerns about the human rights situation in the Philippines and how I try to put these issues on the agenda in my country, because I'm a member of the parliament since 2 years, now a bit more than 2 years. And probably you know that I'm a member of parliament in Belgium, and probably it is clear for you all that we have no strong connection between Belgium and the Philippines. So it's not really easy to put the Philippine current situation on the political agenda in my country. But nonetheless, I try to do that. And why is that? I used to work in civil society during 20 years almost. And during these 20 years, I had the chance to have a very close partner, an NGO partner in the Philippines. And through this partnership, I was able, with my colleagues at the time, to understand the extent of the violence against the human rights activists. So it was clear for me that while I was in the parliament, I would try to put the Philippines agenda in discussion in the parliament, which is not that easy. But I will give you 1 or 2 examples of what I've been trying to do, which is not much, but probably it's something that we should all do in every parliament in the world. So I had different opportunities to challenge the government on the position they would stand in the international forums and during the bilateral connection they have with the Philippines. I can give you a couple of examples. In October 2020, I questioned our Minister of Foreign Affairs. That was just after the presentation of Mrs. Bachelet's report to the United Nations and after the vote of the European Parliament resolution. And I wanted to know at the time, in particular, if Belgium could consider putting pressure on the European Union to put an end to the trade preferences that the Philippines have enjoyed since 2014. Indeed, as you know, the Philippines benefit from trade preferences with Europe. And the minister told me at the time that ending these trade preferences could be an option if the human rights situation were to deteriorate further, including through the reintroduction of death penalty. So that was something to build on. And I came back to the government in April, last April. That was just after the Bloody Sunday of 7 March. And at that time, a first version of the Investigate PH report was released, and I wanted to know how Belgian and European diplomacy had received the report's recommendation. And at the time, the minister's answer was rather vague. Of course, my minister denounced the violations, but nothing really concrete was proposed. So obviously yesterday, the input of Mrs. Bachelet was really useful, I think, and it gives me more strength to go back to my government and ask more about what they are actually willing to do to support any attempt on the international level or European level to do anything to support civil society in the Philippines. But the question for me now remains, what can I do for my parliament and what can we do collectively as members of parliaments across the world? So, because I still believe, and I still strongly believe that it remains our responsibilities to support the political and public attention on the Philippines regarding the ongoing harassment, threats, and killings that the civil society is facing these days. So I will obviously continue to regularly question our government on the situation of the Philippines, and I will put on the agenda some of the recommendations that the report has highlights. In particular, I really want to support the fact that the Belgian government has to support within the United Nations the establishment of an independent inquiry into human rights violations. I strongly believe that this is still absolutely necessary these days. And I will try to go back and continue to ask the government to support the use of the trade preference agreements as negotiating leverage and consider suspending them if the situation is not going better. And obviously also I will continue to ask my government to support directly the civil society in the Philippines. It has been said earlier, the grassroots movements need the international support. And we have very strong Belgian NGOs active in the Philippines. And I want to make sure that our government still support them and make sure that they are not facing more challenges in the way they are implementing the solidarity with the grassroots movement in the Philippines. And obviously, maybe a last thing that hasn't been told yet today is to continue to make sure that the Belgian government is actively engaging in greater international justice in the fight against the pandemic. I think that if we give more means to the southern countries as a whole, but also in the Philippines to face the pandemic issues, it will also help the grassroots movements to organize and make their voice heard more largely. So this is basically what I wanted to share with you today, and once again to share with you all our solidarity with the grassroots movement in the Philippines. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Severine. Our next speaker, there's a lot of good ideas there, I think. Our next speaker will be Bishop Rex Reyes from the Episcopal Church of the Philippines and a member of the World Council of Churches Executive Committee. And following him will be Lady Anne Salem. So we have the two voices from the Philippines itself now at this point in our discussion. So please go ahead, Bishop Reyes.
Thank you, Peter. Mabuhay at magandang gabi mula sa Pilipinas. Good evening from the Philippines to all of you. Let me first appreciate the steadfast solidarity of our friends in the international community in various ways since the time of Marcos, perhaps. 5 presidents after a lawyer president called Marcos, we have a lawyer president named Duterte. And to borrow the words of an esteemed human rights lawyer here in the Philippines, he is one who is persecuting people instead of persecuting the law. So yesterday, we had an international ecumenical solidarity gathering for human rights and peace in the Philippines. It was about this hour, Philippine time, evening. And we were able to muster about 126 on Zoom and a little bit more than that on Facebook who attended from many parts of the world. And we are certainly grateful for the solidarity showed by many people around the world. Many years ago, about a decade ago, yes, when the US Senate committee was looking into the human rights situation in the Philippines, Senator Boxer said, and I quote, "One killing is one too many." What she said, and the support of the international community before and after that to this very day, were tremendous encouragements for us in the Philippines. the dispatch from the United Nations arrived late after we finished our convocation yesterday, but had we been informed of that during the convocation, we would have really added that another round of applause for the statement from the United Nations. We heard our church leaders. We concentrated on 3 main areas. Of course, we know that so many, the persecution and the killings has cut across so many. But yesterday's discussions was focused on the experiences of church leaders, our bishops, pastors, lawyers, no, I mean indigenous peoples, I'm sorry, and the war on drugs. And at that meeting yesterday, a mother who lost her 2 sons in the war on drugs said, when I heard about the report of the ICC and the report of the Investigate PH, hope surged in her. And she felt strongly that probably this would be the beginning of justice for her 2 sons who were killed in the name of the war on drugs. But what about the churches? Well, churches, they can theologize about everything, but it has been, by and large, the participation and the solidarity of international partners has made us more appreciative of the role of international partners, churches and civil society groups and individuals. In fact, following the statement of Senator Boxer, it has become our statement, sort of, in the ecumenical movement in the Philippines, that the defense of human rights in the Philippines is the defense of human rights anywhere in the world. So I just like to second what Senator Rice just said. And another encouragement comes from abroad, not to mention the encouragement that comes from the roots of the grass in this country. And in our dealings, we also get comforted by the motto that is popularized by the United Church of Canada. You are not alone. So it has given a lot of hope for us in the Philippines. Yesterday, we had the privilege of listening to the Reverend Susan Henry Crow and Reverend Chris Ferguson, who are both commissioners of the Philippine Commission of Investigate PH. And much of what they said has been mentioned already largely by some of the speakers, some of the recommendations. I heard Senator Rice very clearly, and I would like to echo the recommendations that she cited, among others. So we thank the strengthening and the renewing and whatever that is coming from the international community. And if only for this reason, the ecumenical community in the Philippines, for example, continues to lend its voice to other bodies in other countries that are similarly situated. And I think that is also true with many civil organizations in many parts of the world, especially in the global south. And we are pleased to see that this solidarity is increasing among our ranks. Well, I need not underscore that we are into the election fever now. It has already been mentioned by Senator Rice, and we don't know what this is going to bring, but we are already talking about it in our circles and how to go ahead to continue calling people to account for what they do and what they did. 2 or 3 days ago, President Duterte, who has brushed away anything that is ICC, went to the press and said he's not running for president because he's going back to Davao to prepare his legal case against ICC. Oh, wow. So what else can this guy come out with? But anyhow, just to convey to you on behalf of the other groups in the Philippines, our deep thanks to you, to the UNHRC, to the ICC, and to Investigate PH for such consistent and long-standing solidarity. Mabuhay po. Thank you, Murray. Peter, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Reyes. Thank you. I'll now, we've gone over time, of course. I'd like now to introduce Lady Anne Salem to also give her ideas now where to for our campaign.
Good evening, and I'm happy to be with you tonight. The campaigns around the case of the Human Rights Day 7, the 7 of us arrested on December 10 last year, and in particular for myself and the labor organizer Rodrigo Esparago. These help our situation inside one of the over-congested, dilapidated, and underfunded city jails in the country. We were not treated like common criminals, despite how we found out that there is a culture among those jailed to assume that you actually did what you are accused of, even if you're still on trial. And even a personal information form in the jail asked for a date of commission of crime, which I had to edit to reflect that the charges against me were cases I was accused of, but have not been proven. But 5 of the Human Rights Day 7 are still in jail, and more than 700 political prisoners languish in jail. Over 480 of them were jailed under Duterte. There have been some welcome developments locally after my release on March 5 this year, albeit on their initial stages still. One is that several courts quashed or voided the search warrants against activists, like in my case, and especially some from the same judge that issued the warrants against me. And these cases revealed the recycled police narratives, a pattern of faulty police work and irregularities that I hope later would also give way for the judiciary here and the international human rights community to stop the ways in which the police and the government have weaponized the law against critics and activists and against their constitutional and human rights. Another is that the Supreme Court changed the rules on the powers of the executive judges to issue warrants anywhere. This is now limited to only within his or her region, because I still find it absurd how warrants from a Quezon City judge was served to Bacolod. That's, I think, hundreds of kilometers away, meaning the witness had to fly all the way to Quezon City to testify on guns, on seeing guns and contraband for the police to obtain search warrants and then fly back to Bacolod to serve them. And journalist Anne Kruger is still on trial as part of that crackdown that arrested more than 50 in the region of Negros. We will still find out in the days to come if the new rule will effectively dismantle or disable courts from becoming warrant factories, or the government will again find another crack at the system that they could exploit. Another is that the rule on police body cameras, while we still need to learn and practice if these will be effective, would at the very least give the victims like us something to raise against those who storm our homes at ungodly hours, not serving the warrants before they even enter the private spaces of persons and incapacitating them before the actual search is announced. Journalist Frenchie Cumpio was made to fly face down as the police move around, planted evidence, and before they declared the start of the search. She has been jailed for 20 months now. Case proceedings have slowed down as courts were closed during the repeated lockdowns this year. Today, Maria Ressa's Nobel Prize, in the recognition of the importance of press freedom, freedom of information and expression, and yesterday's oral report from the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights are a rebuff to Duterte and the regime of human rights violations he oversaw in the country. But legal victories such as ours came with, for a lack of better word, trade-offs and of course reprisals as expected. The trial judge in my case was red tagged. Similar raids with arrests or killings happened within days of legal or human rights victories, like how Bloody Sunday happened 2 days after my release. And for that, we could not celebrate our release, and we have actually not really celebrated. We have also an ongoing case, as the government's lawyer have appealed the dismissal of my case at the higher court, accusing grave accuse against the trial judge. This new case has been a source of insecurity for our physical safety for months now. But our release on the whole, ironically and unfortunately, is a source of insecurity for our physical safety, as we know the pattern of more severe reprisals after a political prisoner is released, such as the cases of Randall Echanis and Sarah Alvarez. But for as long as we are here and with all of you and with all human rights defenders, I will continue my work as a journalist, and we will live and fight for justice, human rights, and democracy for another day, and for every day of freedom and life we have, and to take up that cause which have been deprived from so many others who were jailed or killed. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you very, very much, Lady Anne Salim. It's very sobering to get the feel for the situation you are in, and so many other fine activists in the Philippines. So that's the end of the opening remarks by all of those people who've done them. Thank you so much. I think now I remind you, if you want to make a comment, try to keep it to 2 minutes, or ask a question is fine. Use the reactions button to put your hand up and we'll give you the call. So I'll put the hand up like that next to me, and now I'll try to take it down. Okay, that's how it works. So who would like to open up now? I think we've gone to the hour. I'm just going to go to 1/4 the hour and see where we're at. I don't want the meeting to go on and on as late as it is. So yes, Anna Bianco, please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Anna Roach, and I'm a journalist with Pass Blue. I am looking specifically at the joint program that the UN has recently announced, and I think they recently extended that. It was going to be 1 year, and now it's 3 years. And there's a lot of discussion about, as we've discussed during this panel, capacity building and technical assistance, but I'm really struggling to understand exactly what this program is going to do and include, and what kind of funding supports it. And so I would really appreciate some clarity from anybody on this call who has some insight into I guess the concrete details of what this joint program is that the UN has recently announced.
Thank you, Anna. Is there anybody in the call who wants to just quickly respond to that? Is that something you've looked at, Edre, yourself? Are you in the room? Okay. If I could just quickly respond, the Philippine delegate explained in his own way yesterday at the UNHRC. So he's saying that there's 3 aspects to the program. One is to create a national mechanism for reporting and following up on cases through a creation of a digital tracking database, and also something a bit vaguer, that would mainstream a human rights-based governance. The second point, that the interagency committee set up under Administrative Order 35 will investigate and prosecute human rights violations, strengthen the witness protection program, and establish a national referral pathway for human rights cases. And the third aspect is a human rights-based approach to drug control and strengthening criminal justice responses for drug-related crimes. So that's how they see it. And I think in terms of the funding, it almost all comes from the UN itself, from the different agencies. When it says it's a joint program of different agencies of the United Nations, including the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And the delegate said that the Philippines had contributed $200,000. You know, I think that's really a tiny amount compared to what the UN will be putting in. But I don't have an idea of the budget, Anna. So I think you can see from my description how it could well be that in 3 years' time, when this program is meant to be completed, that there will be really very little change in police procedures. But we live in hope, and maybe there can be a change after the next election, maybe, that would make this more meaningful. So I think that's all I can add.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. What about, sorry, would somebody else like to make comments or ask a question? Especially thinking about what are we going to do from here on, especially for the next year. Could I ask Elmer if you would like to make some kind of response from the point of view of the KMU?
Yeah, I'd like to say that while we speak here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, there were two arrests just recently made by the Philippine government on the persons of Anak Pawis members Lito Baez and Willie Capareño. They're members of the Anak Pawis party list, which is my party list for this electoral exercises, and they were apprehended because of a case which the authorities say that they've been involved in during the Bloody Sunday massacre. Of course, these charges are obviously trump-up charges, just like basketball uniforms. They always pop up anytime they wanted to arrest somebody. But more than that, the cases of extrajudicial killings of various sectors, and including the labor sectors, hasn't been addressed by the Philippine government, even with the existence of Administrative Order 35 of the Department of Justice. In fact, when Miguel, one of our officers in Southern Tagalog, has been murdered, no other than the Department of Justice chief said that they still have to ascertain whether this killing of Dandy Miguel is a labor-related case. So, in essence, they haven't been responding to the calls of various quarters, both in the Philippines as well as various international organizations, and therefore it is really important to make a follow-up on the actions that have been taken in many countries worldwide. I heard about the presentation of Your Honor Severin de la Vallée, who's a member of parliament, about the European Union action taken and a threat to suspend the trade preference on the Philippines. In fact, let me remind you that in the end of 2019, the European Union came up with a strong statement condemning the blatant human rights and trade union rights violations in the Philippines. In fact, the local affiliates of the ITUC in the Philippines came out with a very supportive statement about this. However, since then, there wasn't any action done again till now, and so I think it is important to make a follow. We had a lobby work in the Australian Parliament also in 2019, and I think it is also an important thing to make a follow up on this. In the case of the trade unions, we have filed our case brief already with the ITUC ILO virtual exchange, consisting of 7 cases of EG case, 12 cases of illegal arrest and detention. I just like in ending, I just like to inform you that what is happening now in the southern Tagalog region is that they're using the NTF LCAC to force our trade unionists as well as our bona fide unions to disaffiliate from the KMU. To name a few, this is happening Wyatt Nestle, the former Philips union NXP, and 3 other unions. So there's blatant violation in terms of the human rights and trade union rights of the labor movement, as well as many sectors of Philippine society. Thank you so much for supporting us and taking action with these blatant violations being unleashed by the Duterte regime till now. So I think the ICC investigation should be pushed through, as it was a big news tonight on television. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elmer. Given the quietness of the meeting, I'd just like to now ask if Patricia Lisson from Canada, who's on the ICHRP Global Council, would just like to convey any ideas that are emerging in Canada about actions that we could take in this coming period. And then I'll move over to Julie Smith from Europe, also involved as an ICHRP coordinator there. So go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to all of those who spoke just on this forum. It's very helpful and and useful to hear people's comments and to understand how other folks have been understanding and engaging in the Investigate PH. One of the comments I'd like to make is that it's come up on by several speakers have raised the issue of documenting evidence. And that's a question that we're trying to deal with here in Canada, ICHRP Canada. We have a meeting coming up at the end of October. And so the question is, what are our next steps and how do we document evidence? Do we need to continue something similar? I hate to say this because I know Peter's worked really hard, and so has the many other folk sitting at these tables, something similar to Investigate PH, to continue to document evidence on the international arena. And I would that's a really important question that I think we need to look at and figure out how we might do that. The other question for the Canadian audience is, how do we bring before the Canadian Parliament and our Foreign Affairs section of that Parliament the recommendations that have been highlighted clearly in Investigate PH? And we've been doing it in a number of ways, but clearly need to be much continue to do it, but also find ways that that give it a bit more oomph. And I think some of the comments about what's going on in the European Parliament, particularly our Foreign Affairs Department, we need to reinforce with our Foreign Affairs Department, or missions, as we call them here, that other countries are actually engaged in similar conversations. So that's really helpful. And how do we bring it to our local regional forums across Canada? And so these are things we're working on in Canada. But also the other question that's going to come up at our meeting at the end of October is, how do we support the election movement in the Philippines? And is it reasonable and safe to think that we could send election observers, I think is the term? And is that helpful? Is it useful? We need some direction from our partners in the Philippines, which I know it would be really helpful to have. What should we do next? And our partners on the ground, certainly in the Canadian mining aspect, we're doing some work on that, education, but also what are our next movements and steps? And we thought we had some fairly good action with our Canadian government, but that's kind of fallen through to be a lot of talk, but not much action in the Canadian mining law and actions that we could take here. So we're continuing to work on those areas and are now joining with a group in Australia, particularly around something like Oceana Gold, where we're trying to work, figure out how we can do some more actual hands-on pushing our government to take action there. So thank you, Peter, for all your hard work and chairing this forum today. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Can I ask Julie now to just speak briefly about what's possible in Europe?
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks, Peter. It's been very good listening to everybody's inputs, because I think it's now that the Investigate campaign is, at least for the moment, come to a certain conclusion. It certainly isn't finishing, and there's so much work still to be done. I think what was particularly interesting to me was to hear, for example, what Severin was saying, and also this idea of the parliaments working together. I think we really need to, that'll be probably the next steps for us also in Europe, and perhaps also to be exchanging with each other on what we're doing. I think, yeah, as we just said before, that it'll be, you know, we've all been doing certain things, but maybe if we can share our experiences, I think we can learn a lot from each other in our political parliamentary work. Just going back to what was said about the European Union, it's what Rex was saying. I think it was certainly very useful, the resolution of the European Parliament last year, and we need to build on that. But the problem is a little bit that decisions are made not by the European Parliament, but by the European Commission. So that's where we really need to be. We need to be strengthening our European Parliament members and working with them. And to keep the pressure on that they keep coming back with these, appeals to the European Commission to actually take action. For example, on the GSP Plus, I think what Severin was saying before, it's great what their work, and I think perhaps in Europe we need to coordinate better among civil society groups and ICHRP groups to bring pressure to bear. Maybe there, the UK, the CHRP UK. I think there's someone from CHRP UK here today, so sorry for speaking for you, but I know that you've been doing a lot of great work on lobbying the UK government, especially on the question of arms to the Philippines and surveillance equipment. So I think there too we can probably, we need to link up more on this kind of work. So I'll close there, but that's perhaps one of the important things to do. We have a responsibility to act in Europe on this. So good luck to us all in the coming months. And let's continue our working together.
That's very positive ideas, I think, Julie. I noted that Drew Miller is on the call from the United States. He's also another ICHRP coordinator. So Drew, if you could just speak for a couple of minutes about what the plans are there in US. You need to unmute yourself, Drew.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. In the upcoming months, I can share that we have significant actions we're taking to raise the Philippine human rights situation. So we do have a bill into Congress called the Philippine Human Rights Act, which calls for the suspension of military aid. That was introduced by Representative Susan Wild, and we're actually doing a National Day of Action on October 18th. So there's people all over the United States, in different cities, mobilizing in support of this bill and recognizing the victims. So there will be these in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, New York, New Jersey, and then also in Washington, D.C. We'll be hosting a press conference with Representative Susan Wild, who introduced the bill, and then labor and church people. And then, yeah, we're really pushing for this bill to go to the next stage of committee consideration. And so we have lobby efforts across the country to help get the number of people we need on this bill to come to a hearing and to be further evaluated. And so the findings of Investigate PH have been extremely helpful. We've been able to send them on to legislators for more information on when they're asking questions. So yeah, thank you just for this gathering and roundtable too. And we'll definitely continue to contribute and fight for the Philippine Human Rights Act in solidarity.
Okay, thank you, Drew. I'm going to try to close this soon, but I've got an indication from Antonio Tuhan to respond to Patricia, and then we have the speaker from ICHRP. So, Tony, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Because I asked for the floor because Patricia raised the question of the elections, and indeed, that is an issue that is in the mind of everyone. On one hand, for the Philippine movement, the elections is an important way of expressing our civil and political rights, and therefore a number of organizations in the Philippines are participating as candidates and so on. We also feel that the elections provides an occasion to open up the political discourse, and in that sense, therefore, these elections becomes more important for the people themselves in raising their issues regarding pandemic management, the question of the terrible poverty and misery, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the policies of Duterte, and also the question of their conduct of their so-called war against terror and communism. On the other hand, Duterte has already warned that he still has 1 year, and he wants to fulfill his promise to Trump to end the communist insurgency, and that also warning that there will be the military will step in, and if the elections becomes unmanageable for the benefit of Duterte's party. Meaning to say, Duterte has won a scenario that is called Noel, and second, a scenario of intensifying repression, but saving the so-called election of the likes of Bongbong Marcos or Sara Duterte. So one part is to ensure that there is a transition within his party, but on the other hand, he also has warned, and indeed it raises the question of Noel, which means no elections scenario, which means to say, if it is no longer manageable for them, then the question of military takeover can happen. In that sense, therefore, the responsibility of fighting for the people's rights, for their democratic processes, but at the same time, the responsibility of international support is important, and therefore we have to be ready for different initiatives that will come up next year. It's not yet this year, it's next year. For now, there's a lot of talk of elections, but to plan, in an answer to Patricia's question, that is something, the question of further investigation. Number two, to have missions, to intensify the missions and so on, including the demand for the Human Rights Council to step in now, not next year, are kind of urgent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Can I ask now the speaker from ICHRP? I don't know who you are, but turn on your camera and...
Yes, I will. I can. Just a second. So, video. Excuse me. Hello, my name is Geraldine Reardon. I apologise most sincerely for my very late arrival. We were having difficulty even finding someone because there was really no one available. So unfortunately, you have me, who's a fairly low order in the ICHRP hierarchy here. I just wanted to thank Julie for mentioning the work that we've been doing with the members of the UK Parliament, of which we have some support, but it's not very outspoken or hardened up yet. We have had a number of webinars with members of Parliament, and also including members of the House of Lords, and that has been helpful, and they're getting to be better attended as we move along. But alongside that, we've been having meetings with what's now called the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Development now is seen as part of that, so development aid is being brought into that regime with the government we have, and that's really interesting and helpful in a way, but we can't really see where we're making progress with it, except that we do get some information from them, and they feel, I think, more comfortable in working with us because they know better who we are. And it is really a hard slog, and this is not easy government we have now to work with. They're not inclined to be supportive, and so civil servants are extremely cautious about any activity that they engage in with organizations such as CHRP. But we do really welcome being brought into the ICHRP Europe and having a good working relationship with Julie, and we get a lot from that relationship and would thank her for it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Geraldine. I'm just looking at the chat there, but I think it's time to wrap up, unless there's another person who wants to make a contribution. Bishop Reyes, you want to say something? Please unmute.
No, Peter, I just supported the last speaker.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a request in the chat that the transcripts, especially all these ideas from tonight, be available. We'll try to do that soon. From the ICHRP point of view, I think through Investigate PH, we've reached out to another whole circle of organizations, and we'll definitely invite all of them to become members of ICHRP if it's appropriate from their organizational policy point of view. And we will consolidate these ideas. I think it was very sobering, the inputs there about the possible scenarios around the elections. And of course, this is going to become the focus. So documenting and reacting to violations of human rights as they happen as quickly as we can, I think we will find a way appropriate to our resources to do something. And I think building our organization and in our own countries, focusing on our parliaments and governments, I think that all came through. And I think we should all celebrate the Nobel Peace Prize going to Maria Ressa as much as possible, and really drive home in all of the circles we have that the ICC decision is a very significant decision, which really completely affirms everything we've been working on for all these years. So let's do our best to use all of these achievements and resources that we have assembled so far to take this struggle forward. Can I thank everybody for your participation? All those who gave the opening remarks, thank you very much for your preparation and what you gave. And we will meet again on this journey, but I don't know exactly where and when, but it will happen. Thank you very much. You should open your mic.